all the breath techniques that I choose to use are ones that are down regulating, and that's really intentional. I don't use any breath techniques that are overly stimulating. Now, I would in a one-on-one if somebody needed that, but if people are coming to me for anxiety, they do not need breath of fire.
Right. Yeah. Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, I have the great privilege of having a guest, Nyk Danu, who is an International Association of Yoga Therapists certified yoga therapist. Her therapeutic specialty is back pain and anxiety relief, but she also works with a very specific area of society. And Nyk, welcome, but I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your niche.
Sure. So I work with what I call Yoga Misfits. So Generation X and sometimes Y, like early millennials. They're people that don't feel at home in mainstream yoga circles. They don't think that they're yoga people. They're usually, alternative folks, introverts, geeks, bookworms, the underdogs. And they don't typically feel like they could go and do yoga. It's not, they don't think that they're yoga folks. So that's who I specialize in. Basically, it's me before I found yoga.
Beautiful. Yeah. And so how did you make that transition to get yourself into yoga? Yeah.
Oh, well, my first yoga class I was actually bribed to go to. I had zero interest in going whatsoever because it was so not rock and roll enough for me. This was in the late 90s. So 98 is when I went to my first class. I was a hairstylist at the time. And one of my colleagues said, wouldn't it be fun if we all went to this Monday morning beginner yoga class together as a group? And I was like, did you say Monday morning? Like, that's a day off. Like, no, there will be no Monday mornings. I zero interest in yoga because the only representation I had seen of yoga was that PBS special where she was, doing the sun salutes in the unitard. And I was just like, that is something that like only hippies do, or like my mom's friends. Like, I was just like, that's not for me. But she bribed me with door-to-door service and a latte on the way. So I said, okay, fine, I'll take this silly beginner yoga course. And from the very first class, I fell madly, deeply in love. I was just blown away. I said afterwards, I'm going to do yoga forever. Like, I was completely hooked. And so we did that series together, and they kind of filtered off and did other things. And I was just like, nope, yoga forever. It was anxiety was what I now know. I didn't know at the time that I had anxiety. I thought I was just, kind of prone to worry, or I just thought a lot. And that was the first time in my life where my mind focused on one thing. And it was that present moment and what I was doing with my body in that class and what the teacher was saying. And that had such a drastic effect on my nervous system that's what hooked me. I was just like, whatever that is, I'm going to have some more of that, please. Yeah. And so I did do some yoga on and off for a few years. There was a couple of years there where I would, I'd take a beginner session, and then I would, decide I could practice on my own. And then I would only know 3 poses. So I would go back. And then in the early 2000s, it became very clear that my career as a hairstylist was not going to last forever. I had a lot of work-related injuries, and also I'd been kind of a bit of a closet Buddhist for a number of years. Like, when I wasn't, out at a hair show and with my colleagues drinking martinis and traveling and teaching hair and at the salon, I was like, I would always have my face in some kind of meditation book or and so that kind of started to take over more and more of my mental and heart space. And as I was thinking about what am I going to do if I can't do hair, because I had a friend who was a hairstylist who overnight found out she was allergic to hair color and had to completely stop and had no plan B, like no other job skills. And I could look at her and be like, I'm in exactly your position. Like, my other job skills were skills that I developed on the way to becoming a successful hairstylist, like bartending and being a barista and serving, all the little Joe jobs you get at the beginning while you're building. And I just thought, wow, I guess if I'm going to come up with a plan B, it might make sense to do the plan B while plan A is still paying my bills. So I went to yoga school, I call it. I took my first 300-hour training. It was many years ago. And I finished that first one in 2004.
Okay.
And since then, I've done a boatload of other teacher trainings and my yoga therapy certification. But that was kind of where I started. As a hairstylist, I already was teaching. I was teaching advanced hair color technique. And so I was already traveling across the country and also doing, workshops and stuff. So teaching for me felt quite natural. And so I just was like, well, I need to learn a whole lot more about yoga if I'm going to teach this. And so, yeah, it felt quite natural to be teaching something, that I just loved and adored, because I was spoiled. As a hairstylist, I had a job that I loved. I was trying to imagine like going to go get a job that I hated for hours a day. So
yeah,
that was the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. What an incredible story. And how did you come to your niche of working with misfits?
That took a long time, I'll be honest. When I first started teaching, you didn't really need to niche because there wasn't very many yoga teachers. And so I just would set up kind of like location specific classes. I'd put a poster up that said yoga this day, this time. I'd have pictures on it that kind of represented, a diverse group of humanity. It wasn't all just kind of Barbie dolls in the pictures. It was, regular folk using props, and I would just put, the day, the time in my website. And that was all I needed to do back then for my classes to just fill up and have a wait list. But eventually I started to realize that, first of all, I couldn't find, when niching became on my radar, I would look at all of my students and think, what in the world do you all have in common? Like, you were all attracted to my classes and this practice with me for some reason, but like they were different age ranges, kind of like I said, Gen X to early Y, different tax brackets, different genders, different, like, I just was like, I don't understand what you have in common with you and you and you. And I did that for probably a couple of years while they were resting in Shavasana. I'd be looking at them going, what is the common element here? And then one of my students, I was taking a break for summer to go away and do more training. And he said, this is how long ago this was, can you recommend a DVD for me to practice with?
A what?
While you're on break. Yeah. My original yoga things were VHS, but that's a whole other thing.
I'm all right.
Yeah. So I recommended a few DVDs and he said, yeah, I've tried those ones in the past when you recommended them. He said, but they don't teach like you do. And that was the first little aha I got. I was like, wait a minute, explain. What do you mean? Like I do? And he said, that I was really good at helping people who weren't flexible. That, I was using props. I was making poses accessible. I was making them adaptable. I was making them personalized. So, that pose doesn't work for you. Do this one instead. And he couldn't find any of that visually represented anywhere. Neither could I at the time, to be honest. And so that's when I realized, that's what's uniting you people. You're not fit and flexible. You don't think you're yoga people. They're not going to yoga studios. I wasn't teaching at studios at all at the time. It was all like community centers, church basements. So it started to hit me that my community was people who weren't yoga people.
Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
And at first, the first little name that I gave them was Yoga for the Rest of Us. which was kind of my first dip into niching. And it was more accurate than having nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But at a couple of years later, when I was now full, all my classes with the wait list, there was no room for growth as far as in-person things go. And I'm certainly not complaining. That is a blessed place to be as a yoga teacher and very rare.
Right.
But I started looking at some of the folks that I was teaching, and as a fierce introvert, realizing that I was spending all of my extroverty time with my students, and that there was a good chunk of them who I wouldn't hang out with if I wasn't teaching them. And it's not that they weren't lovely people, amazing humans. It was just like, there wasn't that resonance of like, oh, we have these things in common. We have the same jokes, there was just a bit of and not that I'm going to hang out with my students either. That's not very professional, but feeling like there was that sense of resonance was starting to feel like it was missing for me. And so that's when I got even more clear. And I started looking at, okay, well, who are sort of some of the students that I do really resonate with, and what do they have in common? And I essentially realized that they were these kind of like alternative folks or bookworms or geeks or, and it was like, okay. So then I knew more specifically, when I'm going to market, this is where I'm going to spend my time. And I came up with the term misfits. I can't even remember how. I think it might have been that very adorable cartoon of Rudolph where they're on the Misfit Island. I think I was watching that, and I was like,
Island of Misfit Toys.
Yes, yeah. I was like, that's what they are. They're misfits.
I'm not going to sing it because what I do, I will start singing, and I don't want to do that. Sorry, Kari, go ahead.
Now I have it in my head.
Yeah, I know, me too.
And so, so I kind of was watching something and I saw that and I was like, yes, that's it. They're misfits. So when I moved to a new province, which I did about 7 years ago, and knew that I was like starting from scratch with no clientele, I was like, okay, now I'm really going to own this niche. So not only is it people that don't feel at home in yoga circles, probably aren't fit and flexible, don't think they're yoga people, but on top of that, there's this other layer of misfitness. And like I say, they're basically me before I started doing yoga, because I certainly did not think I was a yoga person. There was like zero cool factor in that for me, like whatsoever. Right. And yet one class changed my whole life.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's exactly how it happens, when the student is ready. So today, for our purposes, I want to even narrow it further, because I work predominantly with women in midlife. I thought it would be really interesting to talk about yoga and midlife. And you and I bantered around back and forth a bit about this, and you thought it would be good, and I agree, to talk about how yoga practice can mature and evolve as we move into midlife and beyond. And you experienced that yourself, you said. Can you share a little bit about that?
It started with a diagnosis of chronic fatigue for me. So before that, so I'm a yoga teacher. I'm teaching, 10 classes a week. I'm go. And, having all these random symptoms that doctors, of course, can't figure out, and finally ending up going to like a Chinese medicine doctor and a integrated medical specialist and being like, oh, you have chronic fatigue. No surprise. And so before that, though, I was very much the kind of yoga practitioner that had a lot of shoulds, right? I should do this practice because I eventually would love to be able to get into this pose. I did have yoga poses on my vision board, handstand in the middle of the room without support. And eventually I was actually going to bring my nose to my knee someday with enough practice. And so I had practices geared around those goals. I had discovered a style of yoga, which I'm now a specialist in, called yin yoga. And I was doing that, but I was doing it kind of on my like a couple times a week, or when I was on my moon cycle. And so I was doing it, but I wasn't doing it as my primary practice. I was doing still quite an active practice, not for those who are familiar, not as like sweaty and hot as like Ashtanga or Vinyasa. That was definitely not my speed as someone who's an anxious type. but strong poses, long holds, quite physical practice. And when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, it became really clear that I couldn't keep working and keep practicing that way. Because all the energy I had was going into demonstrating for my students a pose on one side and then quickly coming out so I could rest a little bit. Not doing the practice with them, but just like, here's what we do. And now I use my words. So that shift started to happen. And so then I was left with my practice being yin, which is all floor-based, long holds, no flowing, no strength, really relaxed, and restorative. And what it started with kind of a hatha flow with a little side of yin was now mostly yin with a little sprinkle of restorative and meditation. I had been meditating for several years, but I started doing more of it and longer sits. And through this sort of forced on me, or what I call the frying pan to the head moments, like in a Tom and Jerry cartoon where it's like,
yes,
you need to slow down and rest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So through that, my practice shifted to, I would wake up in the morning, I would get out of the bathtub, I would sit on my mat, I would put my hands on my heart, and I would say, what do I need today?
Beautiful.
And that would dictate what I did. And what I realized is that when I was listening to what I needed today, my practice started to shift from being less physical and definitely not focused on aesthetics and like super poses that I had goals on. Those just all fell by the wayside. My practice became, how can I use these tools to feel well in my body so that I can live my life?
Yeah.
And that was a big shift. So that happened in my 40s, that shift where I was like, oh, these practices are not anymore some sort of an outward reflection of being like a fancy showboat in yoga. These poses are actually completely unimportant and actually sort of useless for my daily life where I'm at right now. So I started doing more of these inward quiet practices, and it changed everything. It didn't just change my practice, which of course it did, but it changed all of the other ways that I wasn't listening to myself as well.
Wow.
And so my practice evolved into something that I did to keep my temple, so to speak, my body, pain-free, to soothe my nervous system, and so that I could be present and more content in my life. So the yoga became a tool to live life instead of the yoga practice being my life. And that was a big shift. And I know from talking with my colleagues that that's not unusual. When you've been teaching for quite a while, there is a certain point in your practice where you're like, you know what? I actually just want to sit and meditate, or I just want to do some breath work. Like, I don't care about all these other fancy things. So it moved from, purely kind of like mostly before that, there was a real dichotomy. There was my physical practice and my seated meditation. And they were very kind of like this and that.
Right.
And that shifted because now I was in these poses for minutes at a time. So like each pose became a small meditation. So by the time I got to my meditation practice, I was like, oh, and it's not like, so that's stuck through my healing and is still this way. So it's not like I don't ever do poses now that require strength. But when I do, I'm doing them for a functional reason. So I'm like, this pose strengthens my back. That's good for my back health. This shape is really good for my deep core. That's why I put it in the sequence. And this also shifted when I started teaching therapeutic yoga, because therapeutic yoga is very individual and very customized. So whether you're working one-on-one with somebody, then it's like completely customized. Or if it's a small group of people that have a similar thing, like if I teach a class for back care, or if I teach, a workshop for anxiety, I mean, those people are all there coming in with a similar concern. Everything that I sequence and put in there is designed for that reason. It's all functional. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to do this little warrior flow because it looks pretty and I like it.
Right.
If that's not helpful, to the situation and it's going to take up valuable class time, it's out. And I'm going to focus more on what do we directly need to help with these situations in this moment. And then a way bigger amount of focus on the nervous system.
Yeah.
That really started when I became a yoga therapist. I mean, before that, I had a meditation practice, which I would have counted mostly for that. But as I started studying yoga therapy and practicing more and more therapeutically, it became the core. Like if people get nothing else from my class other than they leave feeling grounded, I'm successful as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So it's really all of it wraps around the nervous system. It's the bookends, it's the beginning, it's the end, it's the center, it's all of it. And then of course I add in some things, for other things like for back care, nervous system. All the breath techniques that I choose to use are ones that are down regulating, and that's really intentional. I don't use any breath techniques that are overly stimulating. Now I would in a one-on-one if somebody needed that, but if people are coming to me for anxiety, they do not need breath of fire.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's good. I do Kundalini yoga. We do that one a lot. And that's I could see what you're talking about there. So what's really interesting as I'm listening to your journey through this, it's very similar to when I work with clients who are in midlife, this shift that happens in our life when we really start to slow down and say, what do I need? Right? What's going to be helpful for me in this moment? Never mind in general, today, like the way you would get up and say, what do I need today? It's beautiful practice in and of itself, and so yoga in midlife can evolve. So, for example, if some people who are in midlife who are listening say, "Oh, I've been doing yoga, but it's not speaking to me anymore. Or I can't do the things." That's a lesson to take away. It sounds like from that it can shift and change as we shift and change.
And it should.
Right.
And it should, yeah. Originally, the way that yoga would have been taught in India, it would have been very personalized. Like this whole everybody come 30 people in a group thing, that's a Western creation. That is not how it is taught in India. It's very individualized. And now, we live where we live and we do what we do and we go to yoga classes and that's fine. But my goal is always to have as much individuality in a group setting as we can. This is why, so if it's in a class, this is why I give a whole bunch of what I call choose your own adventure options. You could try this, you could do this, you could do this. And I'm always encouraging people to drop back into their own body and see, okay, of these options, which one felt the best for me? And that's something that also happens, I think, when you become a more seasoned teacher, or maybe it's, as you move into midlife, is that I'm no longer listening to the shoulds that the yoga world put on me of like these, first of all, most of the alignment cues are bogus anyway. They've been disproven by body mechanics. So I'm no longer focused on that. Like, what does the pose look like? Is their knee in the right place? I don't care about any of that. I want to know, how are you feeling in the pose? And if your answer is, I don't know, because that's common, there's our work.
Right.
Is to start to cultivate that sense of introception. Of like, okay, well, then I can give some thoughts to help. Like, okay, well, does it feel, tingly or cool? Or, I'll use descriptive words to help them to kind of drop in and be like, no, it's more like this. And this is a skill that, thankfully, I think does develop, especially I think with women as we get older. Hopefully we get less concerned with what the hell the world is telling us to do, and more able to drop into our own inner voice and our own inner teacher and go, okay, but wait, what do I need? What do I want to do?
Right.
And so that's kind of my focus now is trying to encourage people to drop into that inner voice. I had a student once who was my elder by probably, so I'm 50. She probably would have been, this is maybe 7 years ago, 60, 62, something like that. Not a lot older than me, but definitely my elder. And we were in a class and she was doing a shape and she's like, what am I supposed to be feeling here? And I said to her, what are you feeling here? And she said, oh, such a good teacher, always turning me back to myself. And I was like, well, yes, but also humility. Like, I'm not in your body. Right. So I can guess that you might be feeling this somewhere in this region, but I could be wrong. Only you know for sure.
Right. And we're so, it's almost like we have to be retrained to think that way, because that is just not the way we're raised in our society, you know. And it really is about, like, how do I fit in, which, by the way, is a psychosocial phase of development. Thank you, Eric Erickson. But at the same time, we do hit this other phase where we're not so concerned about how do I fit in, how do I make sure that I, that I don't become a misfit, that I don't fit in with the rest of everybody else. When it's so funny how many women I talk to feel that way. It's like, I wanted to let go of how I consider myself in relation to other people, the comparison trap, as I call it, all of that. So that's beautiful. So one of the gifts of growing older is that we can let go of some of that. Now, here's a question that, don't laugh out loud, but I'm going to ask it anyway. See, you did it already. Here it is. Is it too late to start yoga? A lot of people ask me that question. Yeah.
Never. Okay. Because we have to, first of all, we have to look at yoga as a more all-encompassing thing than just the physical shapes. So a lot of people think yoga is just these weird pretzel poses that we do.
Right.
That's only one tiny amount. There's breath work. There is philosophy. There's meditation. So there's so much more that is under the umbrella of yoga. So even if someone is dying in a hospital bed, they can do yoga because I can coach them through a breath technique or a meditation. So no, it's never too late, ever. I will say, though, that sometimes if you do want to start yoga and you try a few and you don't find a fit, don't give up. Because it's hard when you're new to yoga to find a teacher that you resonate with. Sometimes it can be hard to find a teacher that actually is able to adapt poses. This is very rare, unfortunately, in our culture. I was very lucky that my first training was Iyengar based. So I became a props queen right from the get-go. And then, of course, over the years, I mean, I can find something that works for everybody. But I will say that, and this isn't to toot my own horn, it's just, it's been a priority for me, is that I wouldn't say that most teachers have that ability. If they come from a naturally flexible body and they're young, they probably don't know how to modify for you or how to give you something else or a word that they could use that would help you understand what it is that they're saying more, because they don't have that lived experience in their own body, but also teaching experience. So I would say if you're in midlife and you're looking for a yoga class, find a teacher in their midlife because they're going to understand what's going on with your body.
Wise advice.
And so, and even if folks have more serious things going on, I mean, yoga can be done in chairs, so there's either a chair as a prop or seated in a chair the whole time. I don't personally do any chair yoga at this point. I have done when particular students have needed, like they've got a knee thing, or, I can pull in a chair. I can modify for them, but I don't teach any chair classes per se. And somebody asked me, especially when I moved here to Victoria, because it's sort of known as, or used to be known anyway, as the city of the newlywed and the nearly dead. It's not quite that extreme anymore, but people would say, oh, so are you going to start niching into seniors? And I was like, no, I'm going to teach my own demographic.
Right.
And they were like, well, why? And I said, because eventually I will be a senior and I will teach seniors. You know, like I feel like I can't help somebody with something in a really effective way if I haven't experienced it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, the reason I teach back care is because I've had back pain. The reason I can teach for anxiety is because I've had anxiety. If I hadn't those experiences, then my bringing this forth would be very bookish, very kind of head knowledge. Wouldn't be a like a lived experience. And so if you are studying with a teacher who's always been able to touch their toes, they're not going to understand when you can't touch your toes, for example.
Right. It'll just be work harder,
Yeah. Or just, practice and all is coming, which is like a ridiculous quote because it doesn't take into account so many things. So I would say it's never too late. See if you can find a teacher in your demographic to start. You'll have a much nicer experience than if you just drop in at the average hot studio where there's a, really bendy young teacher.
Been there.
And then, I mean, and if I'm speaking in generalizations for those who haven't done yoga. If a woman has done yoga for her whole life, most of her adult life, and she's now moving into midlife, she will have a much better chance in a multitude of classes being able to understand how to modify for her own body or skip what she doesn't want to do. But for those women who are like, I've never done yoga because I've always been super intimidated. And now I just feel like it's too late. Like I'm too tight. I'm too old.
Right.
None of that is true.
Yeah. That's so good to hear. Thank you. And you mentioned earlier about being able to touch your nose to your knees. I literally dream about that. I'm being vulnerable. I have had dreams where I'm doing it. And then I'm like, please don't let this be a dream. And of course it is. But I always think that has something to do with my own back issues that I just can't seem to get in that position, but something that we work on as we continue our practice.
I've never gotten my nose to my knee.
I've never been.
I remember in a seated forward fold in a workshop after a weekend long workshop, finally being able to grab my foot with ease. And I remember being like, oh, and then instant disappointment because it didn't change anything.
Yeah.
Oh, my hamstring's a little longer. Well, I'm not enlightened. Am I a nicer person? Am I a nicer person? Does that make my brain less busy when I sit to meditate? No, it was completely meaningless. It was like, oh, my hamstring is half an inch longer. Yay.
Right.
Affects my life in no way.
And I think too, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners resonate with this. One of the things that put me off yoga was the Western sort of competitive nature and the cliquey nature of it. I love India, been several times. It's my second home when I have the money to go there. And I thought, this is not how you teach it. And it's just not, it just wouldn't resonate with me. It took a very long time for me to find even a style of yoga that worked for me. So I love that you're sharing all of these alternatives and what it should look like, or ideally, and forget the should, but ideally could look like for you based on what you need. So you've said that the practice, your yoga practice, matures and evolves into what you would call advanced yoga. And that has nothing to do with putting your foot behind your head. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, originally, since we're talking about India, and even the other forms of yoga, which would be called Taoism, that kind of originate from China. They don't use the word yoga, obviously, because it's a different country. But in those older cultures, the point of these physical practices, so in Taoism, the point of Qigong and these martial arts is to create a body that's healthy, where your chi can flow evenly and smoothly. Like that's the whole point of the physical practice. It means no more than that. And in the Indian tradition, the asanas, or the shapes, are designed to create a body that is stable and strong and open enough to sit in meditation pain-free. That is the whole point.
Wow.
And yet you bring it to the West and it's all about, getting your swimsuit body and screw the meditation and I'll walk out before final relaxation.
Right.
So we've got it backwards. Advanced meditation or advanced yoga is meditation. So when you have a body that's stable and comfortable and you're not in pain, then you're able to sit comfortably and in contemplation or meditation or prayer, if that's part of your practice, because your body feels good. Like that's advanced yoga. So we have it backwards in the West. We think that being able to put your foot behind your head makes you advanced yogi. Well, if you're doing that and then you're, dealing with road rage and screaming at people in the grocery store, then you're kind of missing the point of yoga.
Exactly. Thank you so much for saying that. This is going to blow thoughts of yoga out of the water for a lot of people. So I very much appreciate it. Further, how can people find you?
I believe you have a link to my website. That's the best way. I'm also on Instagram, but to be honest, with Instagram, we never know with the algorithm who's going to see what. So I always recommend people just get on my website, which is nykdanu.com and then /students. Because I also work with teachers, but those who are not teachers will want the student portal.
Right.
I do one-on-ones on Zoom and in person. I do group classes on Zoom and in person as well. So I have, regular Zoom classes where anybody, as long as their time zone is moderately close to mine, can join. I also have an on-demand video library for those folks who want to practice with me, but live, somewhere where the time zones just totally don't work. So I've got a little bit of something for everyone, whether it's in person, physically, if you happen to live in Victoria, British Columbia, or on Zoom in person, and also a video library and privates. The Zoom classes are lovely because something that's really important to me, which is kind of strange for an introvert, but I'm an anomaly, I guess, is community. And so when we do the Zoom classes, before I hit record, we always take a few moments just to connect with each other.
Nice.
And so, we always say where we're coming in from, what we're drinking. I started that weird trend because I drink liquids that look strange and people would always ask. So it's kind of stuck. And, where we're coming in from, what we're drinking, and then how we're doing that day. And I've been blown away over the sense of community that can be built in that way, where people get to see each other every week because they're registered semesters. They're not dropping classes. So you see the same people every week. You're practicing with the same people. And it's so lovely to hear people saying hi to each other. And it's also lovely when maybe somebody chooses a different class the next semester and somebody goes, oh, where's so-and-so? Why aren't they here? And it's like, oh, they're in Monday night's class. And so it's been very heartwarming to see that the sense of community that I do in person as well all the time, that check-in, has translated well onto Zoom. I wasn't sure that it would, and it has, and that really makes me happy. That check-in time allows me an opportunity to see what is going on with everyone. I always have a plan, but my plan can always be abandoned or modified if what I'm hearing from the group is like, if I had something quite energetic planned and everyone's exhausted or everyone's feeling anxious, I'm going to be like, okay, that's going over here. And here's what we're going to do instead. So
beautiful. Okay. So that's nykdanu.com/students. Thank you so much, Nyk, for this wonderful and enlightening conversation about yoga and midlife and life in general. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self-Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com. And I'll see you on the next episode.